This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and NIL Game Changers. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by NIL Game Changers, Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Okay, so who do we have next, by the way, Todd?
Todd Walker from the Bowling Green play-by-play voice.
All right, here we go. This half hour being brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury, Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 Hummels Wharf, online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, that was my choice. Kia, Hyundai, best in new inventory. Great pre-owned inventory with the Sunbury Motors guarantee. Terrific service department that backs it up from inspections to routine to difficult to handle it all. At Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury, Sunbury Motors Kia. Routes 11 and 15 in Hummels Wharf and online at sunburymotors.com. And let's bring in Todd Walker, the outstanding play-by-play voice of Bowling Green football. Todd, first of all, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Steve, it's great to join you this afternoon. Looking forward to talking some football here and coming to State College on Saturday.
So let's talk about Connor Bazelak, who comes in. Tom Allen knows him well because he played at Indiana, Missouri before that. What has his veteran presence meant to Bowling Green?
Well, you know, it's a different feel this year for him because last year he was the new guy, and I'm not quite sure he ever was fully the leader of the team. This year it's different. He's had the entire offseason, and he's bonded with the team much better with all of that time to do so. And he also had to rehab an injury that he had surgery on. And I think he earned the players' respect last year with his toughness. The second half of the year, he was considerably injured. We knew he was going to have surgery, but he kept playing. There were times where he was, unfortunately, just unable to finish games, and it cost Bowling Green. Frankly, I say it cost them a couple of wins. The Toledo game, almost assuredly, we were dominating them when he played. And then in the bowl game against Minnesota, when he was able to go, the team was flowing very well. So I think it's been beneficial for both of them. He's gained, I think, some maturity. And for the team, they've got a high-level quarterback who's now healthy and they're ready to lead them to, some places they've not been in going on a decade now.
Well, he's not the only quarterback. Anderson, the backup, who's been used in certain situations in the opening game. What does his speed mean to how Bowling Green plays offense, especially in the red zone?
Yeah, Steve, that's quite a wild card because although he did get a couple series against Fordham, he has not played much previous to this as he was a freshman and was redshirting, so it was just real spot duty. But they do want to incorporate him more into the offense, and it will be, I think, instructive to see how big an impact he can make, perhaps against a team like Penn State, to see just how effective he can be. I'm sure when he comes in the game, people are not going to respect the throwing game. He's not proved it, but they can see he can run. So, but he's definitely that type of quarterback. They hope to build around him. He's obviously the heir apparent, but he's got that type of running ability that would add a dimension to the offense that it really has not had and doesn't have with Connor Bazelak. He will run when it's warranted and smart to do so, like he did last week for a touchdown, but just to be a constant threat, he is not, and Lucian Anderson certainly is.
Which then brings me to the running back, Terrion Stewart, had a big game, including a 73-yard run. When I'm watching the tape, Todd, love his feet. I mean, I'm talking like he makes these subtle moves, that his footwork is excellent. What have you seen in his growth and development?
Well, I think the real key for him is he's so shifty and he's so powerful that he invites extra contact at times when it's really not needed to do that. I think as he's maturing as a runner, we're going to see that. Our running backs coach, Brian White, has coached a couple of Heisman Trophy winners, and he's really been in his ear about sticking with the play a little longer rather than bailing out, trusting the offensive line, be a little more patient. But you're right about his footwork. His escapability is remarkable for a player that's built like he is. He's undersized as far as height, but he's big and strong. He is a lot quicker than he looks and a lot faster than you would think he is. But the real thing is you just can't bring him down with the first guy. I mean, I'm sure you've seen all the stats and the metrics from where he was last year when he got hurt. He was leading the nation in broken tackles and yards after contact and some other things. He is very impressive. If he can stay healthy for the whole year, that will benefit Bowling Green greatly. But, he's not done that to this point in his career, so he's trying to do that here in 2024.
Fannin, the tight end, was very impressive in watching this. Not just the ability to catch, but the power as well. Is he really the guy that when everything's breaking down, those quarterbacks look for?
Oh, I think so, especially since most of the wide receiving corps graduated and moved on. So the holdovers that receive the ball are basically him and Jalen Tillman. So Harold is a bit of a security blanket, if you want to put it that way, and they also really try to get him the ball in different ways. He can take a handoff on a jet sweep, for instance, so they'll screen him the ball a lot from the tight end spot, and he can get down the field and hit him with the deep pass. So he's quite versatile. He's very athletic, as you saw if you watched last week's game. He had that thing where he hurdled the guy. I mean, and that's Harold. Again, he's not had as many injury problems as Terrion, but he's had stretches of seasons where he's been kind of banged up. If he can stay 100% healthy, he is a very big weapon, and Coach has been pretty open that he's a NFL talent, and Coach knows what he's talking about. We've got a guy with the Bills now that was our former tight end. Of course, he's coached at Michigan and Auburn and other places. This guy is going to be playing on Sundays, in the very near future.
Scott Loeffler, I go back to when he was at Michigan, is just a terrific coach. And what has his flair and knowledge of offense meant to how Bowling Green plays offense?
Well, I think we're finally starting to see what he wanted to build from the beginning of the offense that he has now. So the offensive line is complete. In other words, there's a starter at each spot that is a genuine number one offensive lineman for Mid-American Conference football. They're older, they're stronger, they're not leaning on young guys or JUCOs or transfers. So that's the first thing. And I think the offense in his mind is built for this area of the country. It's very Bo Schembechler-esque, if you will, with some modern twists. Of course, the use of the tight end is very prevalent. And I really give him and his staff credit for shifting on the fly. If you'll recall, he took over in 2019 a program that was in rough shape and started the rebuild process and the plan. And then, as you all know, our lives were upended in 2020, and everything changed, not just the pandemic, but all the college football rules of roster building changed. And frankly, he had to crumple that plan up and start another one. And maybe it's taken a year or two longer than we would have liked when we started this in 19, but under the circumstances, they've done a heck of a job, and this team is ready to contend in the MAC, and hopefully for years to come, it's built to be a long-term thing.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of times if a guy is a quality player at the MAC level, they're going to transfer, quote, up, okay? Mm-hmm. Every once in a while there's a Malcolm Johnson because he played against Penn State when he was at Auburn. Ali Saad, I think, was Minnesota, and now he's there. So that does happen. What kind of adjustment has that been for Bowling Green and for MAC teams? Because as soon as you get somebody that you've cultivated a little bit and they get to show something, quote, the bigger school wants them.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see that in person in 2 weeks when we go to Texas A&M. Our great pass rusher, Cassius Howell, transferred there. So I think the real key is that you have to maximize it on the other side. And Bowling Green's been pretty good at that. Odu Hilaire has been our best receiver the last 2 years. He came from the FCS level and made it to the final cut with the Falcons last week. So, and then a guy like Connor Bazelak, who's been at a higher level and had some success, but just couldn't seem to put it all together. Now he comes to Bowling Green and finishes his career strong. So I think Bowling Green's been pretty good at hanging on to as many guys as they can, minimizing those huge defections, and then benefiting from the transfer portal and filling in those key areas and really not having many whiffs with that. Like it used to be with the junior college guys. If you take too many and it doesn't work out, it can really hurt your roster composition. I think they've done well with who they've brought in via transfer, and that's helped offset those losses.
Well, and I mentioned Saad already, and also Anthony Hawkins, who just jumped out all over the tape that I watched. And then you go to the linebackers, and I think the guy that jumped out at me was number 3, Joseph Sipp. What about those three guys, and what have they meant to what Bowling Green does defensively?
Well, Hawk is a homegrown guy. As you mentioned, Ali started his career in Minnesota. He's been at Bowling Green for a while now, but Hawk's been there the whole time. He's kind of the heart and soul of that defense, and he's a prototypical Bowling Green defensive lineman that we've had success with. They're maybe a little under-recruited out of high school or a little undersized, but by the time they're juniors and seniors at Bowling Green, they're really good. And he's been wreaking havoc. He was in the backfield seemingly every play last week. And then Joe Sipp has sort of been the next guy to step in and lead that defense from the second level. He's played quite a bit early in his career, and now that Darren Anders has graduated, Joe's taken that over. He's very athletic and capable of making plays sideline to sideline. He had a few nice moments in that Fordham game, too, that you referred to. So he's the one that's the next breakout linebacker. And, another transfer coming in, I should mention, is the starting safety, C.J. Brown, who was an all-MAC player at Northern Illinois on a MAC championship team. That's an area that Bowling Green is going to greatly benefit because it allowed a player like Trent Sims to move from safety to sort of that rush linebacker, that sort of hybrid spot where he will fit in very nicely. So the defense last year was very dynamic at turning people over. I don't know they'll be able to do that to that degree this season, but I think the defense will be good.
I have done one basketball game in my career at Bowling Green. It was a long time ago, so I've actually been there, but it was a long time ago. Thought the campus was beautiful. What to you makes Bowling Green as a community and as a university special, and what makes the MAC and the kind of football they play special?
Well, Bowling Green's fairly unique, even in the Mid-American Conference, and the one thing that differentiates it from almost all the other MAC members as far as its sports lineup is it has ice hockey, and they've won a national championship, in fact, in hockey. So there's a lot of, I would say, synergy between their athletic teams and programs. I think that's maybe not the case on every campus universally. So I think that's what is really special about BG. And it's a college town, no question about it, but it's a university really hitting some high notes right now. They've had a lot of building the last few years with dorms and academic buildings and such, and the athletic facilities. Of course, the game that you broadcast, I'm sure, was in Anderson Arena. They've gotten a new basketball arena since then, and things are really on the upswing. And everybody that ever works at or goes to Bowling Green, it feels like it's part of them forever. And, there are a lot of universities that can say that, but BG's one of them, and I think all that feeds into it.
There's going to be a lot of talk moving forward about the $23 million that the upper schools will have to pay starting next year. Is there concern at Bowling Green, Todd, that the MAC will still play but might be left behind because of the money that has to go into what other universities are paying?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot of angst amongst all the group of 5 schools about what's happening with that price tag you were just talking about, that the bigger numbers are at the bigger levels, but still everybody pays to one degree or another, and things are only getting more expensive as it pertains to being in Division I athletics. I think that the teams feel like there's still a place for them beside the Penn States and the Big Tens of the world, and I think there is too, but there's a lot of changes coming yet. I think we all know that, and you just try to stay ahead of the curve if you can, and try not to be too curmudgeonly. Like I tend to be. Why are we changing all this? I mean, this stuff's coming, and if you can get in front of it, and get your boosters and your supporters on board with what's going to be happening, and hopefully steer them in the right direction, and keep up with having good coaches and quality offerings, I think it can stay somewhat status quo as far as that symbiotic relationship. But there's no doubt there's a lot of worry, I think, at all levels of what exactly all this is going to mean.
As you mentioned, you still have Texas A&M on the schedule, and eventually it's time for Maction. So what does a weekend like this mean, an opportunity like this mean to Bowling Green and Beaver Stadium?
Yeah, the MAC schools are used to this sort of spotlight early in the season, and for Bowling Green, it's a chance in that noon window to get seen by a lot of people on Big Ten Network. And Big Ten fans, I think, are familiar with Bowling Green just because of the geography and the fact that BG plays Big Ten teams quite often. So there's also a pretty good Pennsylvania contingent of students and people that are at Bowling Green. So I've heard from some of them this week that are looking forward to going home, so to speak, if they're with the team or just going to travel as fans. So I think it's always a unique opportunity to take on somebody with the brand recognition of a Penn State and the Big Ten team. And BG's been pretty good over the years at maximizing the opportunity, not just for the exposure, but competitively. Over the years, there's been some taking them behind the woodshed beatings, but there's been some games where they've hung with them and maybe taken the L, but gotten better and represented themselves well. The game at Michigan last year, BG couldn't move the ball, but defensively they showed up well, and it portended a pretty strong season.
Todd, an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. Thanks a lot for your time.
Same at you, Steve. We'll see you on Saturday.
Todd Walker, the outstanding play-by-play voice of Bowling Green football. We'll come back. Chris Raymond in the final half hour. This half hour being brought to you by our good friends at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Hi, this is Season. For over 100 years, the Purdy Insurance Agency has been protecting families and businesses of the greater Susquehanna Valley and beyond. With the experience of our trained and knowledgeable staff, you can rest assured that your needs will be evaluated and met by some of the industry's best representatives. No matter what your insurance needs are, call Purdy Insurance today at 570-286-5855. Visit our website at purdyinsurance.com or check us out on Facebook to see what we can do for you.
You want a unique way to display your brand. You need a team of seasoned experts to work with. You want to reach customers who buy. You want NIL Game Changers, a versatile consulting agency powered by former student athletes and coaches who work as NIL sports agents. NIL Game Changers will help you build powerful relationships with customers through compelling stories, with student athlete influencers as your leading edge. Finally, we'll equip you with the right media to drive your success home. NILGameChangers.org, building meaningful relationships with your customers.
Shamokin Game Orchestra a little late that time.
It would be better if I wasn't sitting here, too.
Yeah, but, it's almost like they were on break and all of a sudden realized they had to play the intro music.
Well, that's me.
We pay them enough money, to be on call. And we're going to talk about Men in White. Chris Raymond wrote the book. He's on with us in the next half hour. That should be a fun conversation, so we're looking forward to that. hopefully you as fans got a better idea of Bowling Green from Todd Walker. I know it's easy to say, whatever. It's like, come on. It's like, game's a game. And we've seen too many times where, like, how'd that happen? Guess what? It's a game. Game's a game. There's that great scene in Rocky 1 where Carl Weathers, as Apollo Creed, is in the corner, and Rocky's been able to land a couple shots, and Bo looks at Creed and says, "Hey, look, you think this is a show?" He says, "That guy thinks this is a fight."
The issue comes when the players also think the same way the fans do when they start going, eh.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing if the fans say, "Yeah." That's I don't worry about that part of it. You don't want the players to do that. If the players are out there and being mature, because as I mentioned yesterday, an element that was so important on Saturday that told me everything that Penn State was going to be in good shape coming out of the break is that watch, if you had a chance to see it, and if you're in the stadium, you know what I'm talking about, how Penn State warmed up to start after the break. They went through their full warm-up, crisp, clean, all the way to running their skellies. West Virginia stopped after 8 or 9 minutes and was on the sidelines hanging for about 5 or 6 waiting for Penn State to finish up. That's maturity. You're going to need that kind of maturity to make sure you take care of business in this game. I mean, you're the prohibitive favorite for a great reason. Now you got to go out and do it.
Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Brewers Outlet, NIL Game Changers, Sunbury Motor Company, and Purdy Insurance. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
This half hour being brought to you by Purdy Insurance. Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. Auto, home, life, business, boat, motorcycle, RV. They do a great job of making sure, A, you're fully insured, the purpose of insurance. B, and the purpose of customer service, is to make sure that you're also saving money wherever you can. So they'll check and see if they can get insurance over state lines. They'll maybe bundles, whatever, but they'll try and save you money and also make sure you're fully insured. That's what customer service is all about. The great people at Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. The book is entitled Men in White, and Chris Raymond is the author of it. Chris, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it as we get a chance to talk about your brilliant work.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that.
So let's start with this. What did it take to organize? Because this is written in a completely different style. What did it take to organize the quotes in the order you needed them to tell the story?
It was kind of like working with a puzzle. I would conduct interviews with the players and sports writers, coaches that I talked to. I think I talked to about 60 people for the book, and then have the transcripts, typed up, and I would literally go through and kind of just excise the gems, right? The quotes that I thought were most compelling. And then I found, in working with it, that they sort of started to kind of connect themselves. They fit almost like puzzle pieces because certain themes emerged in the reporting. And a lot of the players kind of returned to the similar moments or points that they were trying to make. So it was a matter of kind of stitching that together, and I found that it was a lot of fun to do. But the reason that I really kind of chose to kind of go with the oral history was just because, I had covered the team when I was there at Penn State in the 1980s, so I knew some of the people that continued to cover the team in the years after that, but the players had no idea who I was. So I felt like I needed to kind of go to them, and, considering how much they'd been burned by, I think, the national media in 2011 when the story first broke, the Jerry Sandusky scandal, it was easier for me to go to them and say, like, hey, I'm trying to tell this story, and it's really going to come out in your own words.
Did it take more work with a few of the guys than others because of the trust?
I was really surprised. I had much more luck than I thought. There were some players that really never quite warmed up to it and didn't speak to me in the end. But I kind of started with like some of the walk-ons and some of the role players, and I think those interviews went well, and I think those guys kind of talked to some of the other players. And then I got lucky. I was able to get to Trace McSorley and Christian Hackenberg fairly early in the process. And I think by the time those interviews were done, others were kind of willing to speak to me.
There is a narrative about all of this, as we both know. What did you learn through all of this that maybe you did not know before?
I think, for me, I knew a really good story in that 2012 season. And I knew there was a great story in that 2016 season. There was a matter of, can you connect the dots, right, and lead people through those kind of lean years. And I wasn't sure whether there was going to be enough of a story there, and what I found was that there was. I mean, those guys were committed all the way through, and it was kind of like a roller coaster ride. So you did get certain breakthrough games, the 4-overtime win against Michigan, and then you would kind of plummet to, the loss to Temple in 2015. But there were things that they were sort of trying to do. I think the thing that really came through for me was, and I guess you kind of expect this from a Penn State player, but that whole idea about, Paterno's idea about success with honor, high character guys, really that's what they kept leaning on in those lean times, was that, these were guys that were coming here not just to win football games, but because they wanted to kind of be well-rounded individuals, and because they felt that whole idea about like winning with honor, about winning on a team where you're surrounded by high character guys matters. And so it became a little bit more about the mission. So that was really nice to see that idea reinforced, I think. I wasn't sure whether I was going to get that going in, but I definitely had that. It was very clear in the interviews that I conducted with the players how thoughtful they were, and how much that whole idea about kind of playing with those high character guys mattered to them.
Well, as somebody who covered the team before in the 80s, and got to know the players in that era, did you find a lot of similarities between the players of that era and the players of this era that you talked to? And what were any differences maybe you encountered?
I think that it really was, they were all, I remember seeing that transition when I was there from like my freshman year and those guys that came in as freshmen to, the ones that graduated with me in 1987, and just how sharp and thoughtful they were, and I got that same thing from the players that I spoke to from today. I think one of the things that I found was really interesting in talking to Lydell Sargent, who had played years before but had come back to talk to the players when it looked like everything was going to fall apart in 2012. And one of the things that he drove home to me, it's kind of obvious, but I haven't thought about it this way, but because Joe Paterno was there for 50 years, you had Letterman for 50 years who all went through the same exact experience. And that's really unusual for a college football program to have that. And so those guys all bonded because they had all been through the same thing. And, when it impacted their lives, they went back and, talked to their own children. I think that's why you saw guys like Mauti and Zordich kind of step forward to kind of lead this rebirth, because those guys knew very well what Penn State represented and the impact it had on your later life. And so they were willing to kind of step forward and say, hey, there's something important here. We need to rescue this, right? We're not going to let one man tear this program down.
In fact, it's interesting because today James Franklin was talking about Malik Golden, and Malik Golden has started a restaurant in Connecticut. And he was like the core values at the time, because Malik Golden is one of those guys who was brought in by Joe Paterno, played for Bill O'Brien, and then played for James Franklin. Right?
That's
so
right.
he encompassed all of it, and it's interesting how all three ended up having an impact on him in his life in their own way, with Penn State being the common denominator.
That's right. And I really think that's what those guys kind of dialed into. I think the university, the administration, the board of trustees had a very difficult time, defending the university when the scandal first broke. But what these guys tapped into was that idea about success with honor, right? They had lived it, day in and day out. And so that's what they kind of turned to when they were trying to figure out, what guides us through this. And that's really is what they kind of leaned on in the lean times. It's what they celebrated when they won. And I think that's what kind of brought the program back in what is a remarkable span of time, right? Nobody expected them to be back in the Big Ten championship 5 years after the sanctions were handed down. And yet they managed to kind of pull that off. And it was from that. I think you saw Bill O'Brien, the thing that he held up to these guys is you're not going to be able to play in a bowl game, but you're going to play in front of 100,000 fans every Saturday, number one. But number two, you're going to get a world-class education here. I mean, that's right out of Joe Paterno's playbook. And I think you see the same thing with James Franklin today. He's talking about, molding these guys not into just great football players, but into, smart, well-rounded men, right?
Mark Emmert, who still can't find the $100 million from his UConn experience, wanted this place gutted because he wanted to show the world, his power and what it meant, and that Penn State would be playing in front of 25,000, 30,000. When you talk to everybody, what did the fan support mean to them, that it was there on an every game basis?
Yeah, I think that was huge. I think those players, when you turn the corner from 2011, you have Bill O'Brien come in. They have a really great winter workout, and I think they've pulled together and they think they weathered the storm. And then those sanctions get handed down, and worse than the sanctions was, the decision to absolve them of all ties to the university, which meant that you had recruiters come rushing in, trying to tear the team apart, right? You're looking across the table from you and saying, is there going to be an offensive line for me? Is there going to be a quarterback there for me? Those guys that even wanted to stay weren't sure whether the program was still going to be there. And the fact that the fans, rallied. There was a rally days after those sanctions came out at a practice at 6 o'clock in the morning, and thousands of people showed up for that. And that really struck the players hard. There was a pep rally the day before that first game in 2012, and then you just had fans that kind of came out en masse for the whiteouts and the games going forward. And I think it was very clear to those players that maybe they weren't getting the support from from the NCAA and from others, but Penn State fans were undeterred in their support for it. And I think a lot of that was just because those guys were stand-up. I look at it. My son was young, in his early teens when all of this was happening. And, in writing the book, I kind of reflected and I was like, you couldn't have asked for better role models, right, than guys like Michael Mauti and Michael Zordich and Matt McGloin and Christian Hackenberg and Trace McSorley, Saquon Barkley. It really is. There's a sense of a certain kismet there that those are the guys that ended up on the team. But, not only were they great on the football field, like I said, but, guys like Saquon would kind of sit there and sign autographs for, as many fans as wanted to kind of stay and collect them at the end of games. They were all so thoughtful, so well-spoken. They really worked hard in the locker room. It's really, these days it's really kind of difficult when you have a child to kind of say, hey, look up to sports heroes, right? But those guys were certainly there on that team. To this day, you can kind of look up to what they achieved.
If there was anybody in that time that was symbolic that still to this day creates a bit ire among Penn State fans, it's Silas Redd. And Silas Redd ended up, and Lane Kiffin was the coach at the time, went to USC. I know I've talked to enough guys, and I feel strongly this way. I wish he'd come back to Penn State because I know why. He was so attached to Joe. He was devastated by the fact that Joe wasn't there. And what were the comments that you received about Silas Redd? Because I know in talking to the players I've talked with, they'd love to bring him back. And look, and I'd stand side by side with him myself.
Yeah. I think when I was in the midst of reporting the book, that's when that documentary Saving the Roar came out. And that certainly was one of the bigger storylines there. I think one of the most remarkable moments in that documentary is when they went back and talked to Silas Redd about the experience and how much it gutted him. You know, you had a guy there in tears. He was literally in tears at the end of that interview. You saw the impact that it had on him. And I think he spoke then, not long after that, on Adam Brenneman's podcast. And again, just a remarkable interview. And so when I saw those two things, I knew that had to be a moment in the book where you kind of heard from him and what he went through. So I've heard players on those podcasts. I've heard others kind of talk about wanting Silas Redd to come back. But I really do think it's like somebody needs to step forward and make that happen, because I think Silas Redd would really appreciate that, would love that, to be reunited with that group. And I feel like you get the same sentiment on the Penn State side. You know, a lot of those guys kind of look at what he went through and look back to what he meant to that 2011 team. Like, nobody faults him for going to USC.
Right.
He is that guy that looked and said, is there going to be an offensive line? You know, and here's a team that's ready to compete for a national title. And he was like right on the cusp of going into the NFL draft, right, being a high draft pick. So nobody faults him for that.
No, and that's the thing. I've stand side by side with him anytime, tell everybody, hey, look, I mean, I know the reasons why he went, and the reasons you talked about, and again, he had a real attachment to Joe. Right? And so there's a lot going on there. I've always felt, Chris, that with the fan base, there was an us versus the world mentality from the moment this happened until the Ohio State game in 2016, where I've said that when that game ended, the moment Grant Haley crossed the goal line, that to me was the first true release of joy and not just us against the world, that there was a release of joy that night that got the program emotionally into a different level. What was your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think that I think what people on the outside didn't realize in 2011 was that you had the national media sort of descending on the campus and pushing, the story forward, driving it forward, like really pushing for heads to roll. I know for me personally and a lot of my alumni friends, like they wanted answers to who knew what and when, on campus. And it just became clear that was never going to happen. You were never going to get those answers because of how fast they pushed that story forward. And so I think that's where that us versus them mentality comes from. It was like an invading army, really, That's where that us versus them mentality comes from. But that 2016 team, when you look at it, that was one of the most thrilling teams to watch because they had all those sort of come from behind victories. And you're rooting for guys like Trace McSorley and Grant Haley and Saquon Barkley. It's hard not to root for those guys. I think you couldn't look for better ambassadors for the sport of college football. And so I think when they finally broke through, it was clear that the team was back. This was a team that can compete on the national stage. And they did it in a way that was so joyous, right? Such a thrilling win, topped only maybe by the one in the Big Ten championship where they come from like 21 points down, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think that it was hard. It was easy then for the rest of the world to kind of come in and celebrate it, right? And to kind of forget what had happened 5 years later, or at least forgive what happened 5 years earlier.
Chris, I'll use an old-time word here to ask the question: how big did the Rolodex get for this?
It's funny. I have a lot of friends. I actually was able to reach out to a lot of the players on LinkedIn because what people don't realize is their football careers are over for a lot of them. They're off doing other things. So I can say that my LinkedIn followers got significantly larger as a result of it. But again, it was I think I was doing these interviews in the midst of the pandemic and, working full time at Consumer Reports where I worked during the day. So to come, close the laptop at the end of the day and interview one of these players, it ended up being like crazy inspiring for me. And that's why I was able to kind of do it night after night. So they're all good guys, like I said, and I'm just really honored that they trusted me to tell their story, and that I was able to kind of pull it off. And as you see when you read the book, it's really, I didn't have to add any drama to it. I didn't have to go for any salacious details here. There was a great dramatic story that was waiting there to be told, and I'm fortunate those guys shared it with me.
Here it is 12 years later, book's now out. How gratified have you been by the reaction to the book?
Yeah, it's been tremendous, I think, so far. I mean, I've had a few players that kind of reached out to me and said, like, you got it. Thank you. I really appreciate it. But there's also been, I've done signings in Harrisburg and Williamsport and Scranton and State College, and I had fans that came forward, too. And that was also one of the goals was just to try to explain what it means to be a Penn State fan, what it meant to kind of go through that turmoil to people who maybe didn't understand it all that well. And so for me, it's just been tremendously gratifying to have, those fans, people who read it, kind of come forward and said, thank you for telling this story.
What has been your family's reaction to it?
I think they were happy when I got to talk to other people about it. They heard about it for 3 years, as I reported. So they're happy that it's done and that I'm talking to you instead of them.
Fair enough. Chris, it's outstanding. I couldn't put it down. I went wire to wire with it, and I appreciate the tremendous effort that you put in to tell the story exactly right.
Well, thank you, Steve. That means an awful lot coming from you as somebody who's watched the program up close.
Chris, thank you.
For so many
Appreciate
years.
it. Hey, really, good luck with this. It's entitled Men in White. Quickly, Chris, where can people now pick it up? How can they get it either online or in a bookstore?
Yeah, it's in bookstores from coast to coast. So you can go to either brick and mortar stores or it's available online as well. Anywhere where you buy books, you're likely to find it.
Well, congratulations on this great work, and we appreciate the time you gave us today.
Thank you. Take care.
Chris Raymond, he wrote the book Men in White. It is an outstanding piece of work, well worth your time. It is a terrific read. This half hour brought to you by Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com as we continue on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Party time, game time, or just fun time. Doesn't matter what time it is because it's Brewers Outlet time. The Beverage Supermarket has the area's largest beer selection. Imports, microbrews, ciders, and domestics. Pick from over 100 ice-cold 12-packs and dozens of 24-ounce singles. Soda, snacks, hot sauces, fresh roasted peanuts. Make it one-stop party shopping, and don't forget the pickle bar. So whatever you're celebrating or just doing it up, Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury wants to see you. And thank you for your years of patronage.
There's something to be said about a sale with a handshake, a service technician who really knows what he's doing. They can explain it in English what the problem is. There's nothing better than having that friend you could trust in the area. That's Sunbury Motors, where you get selection, knowledgeable salespeople, and prices that fit your budget, and more important, that friend you can trust. Welcome to Sunbury Motors, Kia, Ford, and Hyundai. You could shop other dealers and compare prices, but at Sunbury Motors, you get their lowest price promise. They research the current used vehicle market and guarantee their used car prices are the lowest. If you find a lower price, Sunbury Motors will beat it. 3 dealers all in one. See their full new and pre-owned inventory at sunburymotors.com. Pick out a vehicle you like and schedule your test drive online. Follow them on Facebook. Sunbury Motors Ford and Hyundai, North 4th Street, Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf.